How do you set up to exit? Such an important question because when when we're like, okay, we're done, we want to go ahead and exit. We want to sell the company and all that stuff. Sometimes we don't have the foundation in place to do so, and there's a process to that. It's important to know what your situation is and what you want out of that exit. There's basically two different types of situations when it comes to having a startup or a small business and wanting to sell it. First situation is venture backed or VC backed. VC, or in a lighter sense, investors. You might just have personal investors. You come up with certain parameters where you say, hey, I'll give you 40% of the company if you give me $500,000. And that'll keep the company running. And then you'll always be an owner of the company. I'll just own my 60% as a founder or founders, whatever. You have the 40% for this $500,000 is $500,000. And if and when this company ends up being sold, then you'll get an appropriate piece of that. You know, some of my closest friends are VCs. It's way more complicated than that. That's the basic idea of it. The VC and or investors will say, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll take 40% of it, but with the expectation that within the next 5 years or the next 10 years, you are going to sell the company. And it's going to be at a multiple of whatever it's valued at now. So to do some quick and dirty napkin math, if you go and say, all right, I'm going to go and give you 40% of the company for $500,000. That means that 10% of the company would be worth now $125,000 because that divides into the 40%, which means 100% of the company would be worth $1.25 million. So that means your company, if you take this investment money, 40% of the company you're giving to the investor for that $500,000, now your company is technically worth $1.25 million. That's what a valuation is. Not a valuation like the E, but just the V, valuation. So when they say, oh, okay, this company got a new investment round and now they're worth $6 billion, that's because the investments and how much of a percentage the investors got, if you do the basic napkin math on it, it adds up to the whole thing, the 100%, because they sold this 30% for this amount. That must mean basic math, this 100,000, I'm sorry, this 100% must equal $6 billion. The same thing happens to your company. So that's one situation where it's VC funded. So your opportunity to exit may not be up to you. And in fact, you might have the pressure to exit because essentially when they're giving you this proverbial $500,000, they're basically saying, bet, here's $500,000. The Silicon Valley standard, back when I lived in Silicon Valley, the standard was a 10x. That's why you hear about 10x all the time. 10 with an X, 10 times, right? Just like basic algebra. They're basically saying, we're going to go and give you this $500,000 for 40% of your company. Within 5 years, we expect you to turn our $500,000 investment times 10, 10x, into $5 million. That's why you see the pressure to growth. That's why you have questions as far as we got this money. How can we stretch as much as possible? How can we rocket ship this so it can grow as much as possible? That's why you see this. That's where the energy comes from. So if you're in a VC-backed situation, that means that you probably have board members and or an entire board. There's a lot going on where there's other people that you're going to have to, frankly, answer to. And if it's a certain situation where you're a VC or investment backed and the language is in a certain way, they can technically fire you as a founder and install another founder slash CEO. You can just do a quick Google search, happens all the time. Remember, Steve Jobs got fired from Apple. Keep that in mind. If you didn't know that, now you know. I was a kid at the time. You might have been a kid, or maybe even not born at the time, but in the early to mid 80s, Steve Jobs got fired from Apple, even though it was him and Steve Wozniak at the time who were the two founders. They were investor backed, and They had a board. So he wanted the company to go in a certain direction. They're like, no, I don't think so. And of course, they hired him back. But a lot of fairy tales, as I'm saying, like a lot of stories don't turn out as fairy tales like that. So if you're VC funded or VC backed, then setting up for an exit might not be your blueprint. It might actually be the blueprint or a collaborative, at minimum, blueprint with the people that have invested in you. So that's one situation. The second situation is to be self funded, or an old school way to say it, bootstrap. That's the case of what we did with Cuddler. I've done two startups. One was So Quotable, which was super small, but it got me onto the TED stage, second stage the first time. And then the year after that, I joined Charlie and Jeff, as I mentioned in the previous segments, for our app Cuddler. And then we ended up getting acquired. We ended up exiting. And both of those were bootstrapped. Bootstrapped means that aside from what they would call like a friend and family round or maybe some personal loans, personal as in maybe a credit card or two, that kind of thing that's not uncommon, would not recommend. If this was a Yelp review, not recommend, but it does happen. All that is from personal investment. There is no firm up in Silicon Valley or no outside investors who are like, oh, yeah, I want a piece of the company. None of that is happening. So it was a matter of me and at the time, the most active co founder, Charlie, looking each other in the eye and being like, yeah, I think we're done with this. And then Jeff was cool with that because he was already like, yeah, that's fine. I think it's time for to wrap it up. And then for the process that we went through from when we started to get open as far as us winding things down to the offers to purchase us to when we finalized the deal. I think that was in July. So it's probably a 3 or 4 month period. With that period of time, we didn't have to check in with anybody. Like me looking at him and us saying the exact same thing. That was the check in because we are just investing our own money and our own time, our own resources. So then when we realized that the culture was going in a different direction, I'm a culture guy, so I was definitely vocal about that. And then realized that we had accomplished our mission. Again, if you go to the previous segment, we're talking about what are the reasons why you would exit. You're done, the job is done, or the community is done. The community was great. And we could have kept going. I was about to have my second kid, so I was pretty stretched out. I think Charlie was going to have his first shortly after that. So we both had other stuff going on. But that middle one, the job was done. It's like, all right. As I mentioned in again today's newsletter, I joined Damon.me about when to exit the business. We were in the cover of the Wall Street Journal, and we had 250,000 users. It's like, all right, we already changed the culture, and I talk about this extensively in the complete Bring Your Worth collection and in the books throughout that series. But the basic idea is that we wanted to impact the culture in a certain way. On the markers and metrics that we already did that. So it's like, okay, now what? Like, okay, it sounds like a good time to wrap it up. And so having that level of honesty, I think was really important. But that was also the positive about bootstrapping, is that when it was time to go, we just looked at each other and were like, well, it's time for us to go. Now I know founders and I know other folks, obviously from a lot of founders that I've coached, but also those that I've peers and people I've met at 10 and have just had a drink with, whatever, where they're ready to go and you know their VC backed board was like, no, you're not going to go anywhere. You better figure it out. We'll get you a therapist, but work it out. Get you a therapist, as my favorite shirt says. But they're like, you better figure it out. Like, this company's not going anywhere. Now, if you want to go, then maybe we can make some decisions, but we're not going to shut down the company because that choice isn't always up to you when you have the backing. So yes, it was really tough for us to make $1 or 15 cents and doing the all-nighters and all those other things in regards to that. But the challenge about that is that we had an opportunity to actually do things in ways that made sense. And we could do it on our own journey, which hits different. And that feels differently than having some other people dictate. So it's kind of trade-off you have to make as you're building your company. And as we go through this series, as we kind of wrap this discussion up, then it becomes, do I want to have bigger funding, outside funding, so I can do more faster and maybe even have some good support, some good insights? Or do I want to do it on my own and then be able to have the level of independence so that when I feel like it's done or when my team feels like it's done, we can pivot and be agile, as they say, whenever we want to be? That's a choice. And that's something that we have to figure out as individuals and if that makes sense. There's no clear cut answer. Both of my startups, including the one that was acquired, were bootstrapped. That fit my personality at the time. There might be startups in the future. I would not be shocked. I'm older, but I'm not that much older. So I can still see that happening. And maybe the next time it does end up being VC backed. It's equivalent of, I have this book is published independently, but I have more than a dozen books that are published with Penguin, which is a subsidiary of Random House, with Hachette. I'm forgetting folks, but shout out to all of y'all. You guys have been wonderful editors. So I know what it's like to be back in that way and to do it independently. They're two different animals. So it depends on your personality and what your intention is. That's going to affect when you can exit the business. So you're not going to be, even if you do it independently, you're not going to be the Lone Ranger. You have to factor in all these different parts. But if you get the VC backing or get the investors, it's a whole different level. As you set up your foundation for your exit, which you should be doing at the very beginning, it all comes down again to contracts and discussions. Set up good partnerships. You can't see it by my big head, but I've done about 27 books. I'd say about a third of those, let's say 10. 10 of those books have been co-authorships. So I've worked with an expert, or I've been the expert, and then I've worked with somebody else, or we've both been experts. Shout out to Jeanette with the book, the Passive Writer. Again, all the links are below, or you can go and do a search for the Passive Writer. And so in those situations, it's figuring out the dynamics. Now, it's just not the personal dynamics as far as how we get along, but also the dynamics as far as what are the splits, as they say in the music business. So when a royalty check comes, who's getting what? Is it 50-50? Did I do more of the work? Did you do more of the work? Am I more the expert? Are you more the expert? Who's going to actually do the promotion for it? I have my own publishing company with Bringing Worth Publishing. Am I going to publish it myself, or is it just going to be an independent entity? There's a wonderful TED Talk that I saw recently with Yancey Strickler. If you go to bringingworth.tv and just do a search on Yancey Strickler, you'll find it. I was just at the TED conference. He was talking about a whole new platform, whole new designation called A Corp. So I was talking about that with LegalZoom earlier in the episode. And that would allow us to do splits, but in the very corporate entity sense. So there's all kinds of things you can do. This episode is a great way to start with that. Be sure and check it out. And then Brad Feld, a good friend of actually good friends of mine. I've never met Brad, but Brad, I look forward to meeting you in the future. Fantastic book called Venture Deals. It gets into all the spaghetti I was talking about earlier. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I love legal stuff. Brad Feld is actually a well-known and respected VC. Again, he's good friends with my friends, so I consider him a friend too. And his book is legit awesome. Not too complicated. If you're wading to the waters and you're like, hey, what I'm trying to do, I might not have enough money in my savings or enough support to actually accomplish it. I'm going to need some VC backing. Or what I'm trying to do is so vast that I'm not going to be able to bootstrap this thing. I'm not going to be able to do it on my own with myself and or my co-founders and my employees. Read this book. Even if you are have been a serial bootstrapper as I have been, guess I cut myself that, done it a few times, read the book. Because then you at least will understand terminology. Remember, I haven't gotten a dime of venture backing before, but I know the terminology, I know the lingo, I know enough to make sure that whatever situation I get in next, that I won't be in over my head. So if I'm super independent and I know these things from Brad Feld's book as well as some other books that I've read, another book I've read, which I'm going to recommend at the end of the show, then you definitely should be on board on that. So how are you setting up for your exit? That doesn't mean that you're ready to leave your business or sell your business right now. I know some of y'all that are watching actually are. But it doesn't mean that you necessarily are ready to sell your business or get acquired, exit, all those different terminologies. But how are you setting up the framework for that? Do you, if you are, particularly if you're bootstrapping, do you have a contract set with your co-founders and or your employees or the people that you're hiring? If you end up selling the company, are they expecting a piece of it? Have you guys figured out how you're going to divide the pie? That's something that we ended up doing with Cutler relatively early on, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the next segment, is having that discussion as far as how the pieces would be split up. Have you had those conversations? Are you afraid to have those conversations? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to know, and maybe there's some insight that I can share or that the rest of the community can share that can help you get those details that will put you at ease. Because like any other partnership, it's better to work that stuff out early than to be going out the door and then there's some details you forgot. That is not a good feeling. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown here to help you as a side hustler, solopreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. You're watching Bring Your Worth TV live on Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe for free. You can also catch my latest book, The Complete Bring Your Worth Collection, out at all good bookstores. Bookstores that carry fine books. However they used to say back in the day. That's true too. You go to DamonBrown.net as well, get a signed copy, as well as the Bring Your Worth mug. Forgive my water drinking, but man, like I said, it's about 100 degrees here in Vegas.